This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so the first question is, what future did Himmler envision for Germany and its new Eastern territories once the war was over? So that referred to the first text, and it definitely seems like his plan was to really make Germany the leading, the German people, the leading class. That's on page 2 of the reading, and it basically says in 20 to 30 years, we must really be able to present in the whole of Europe with its leading class. So definitely wanted to start expanding and training those to really just almost take over all of Europe once the war was done. So that's kind of what I saw
Yeah,
in
I
that
agree.
after it.
He was also talking on that similar page too. It said that we shall go on working in this first 6 months after the war. And so they're just because we win the war, our job's not done yet. It's like a overall taking over and conquering the rest of the world, essentially. Not just we win this one war and now we're happy and free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the speech, he mentions colonizing, and then there is the quote. I think it's on page 2. Copious breeding should be from this racial superstratum of the German people, basically saying that the territories they take over, they should essentially enact some sort of eugenics, so that way the superior quote unquote German people can basically essentially take over as the racial majority. And they have he has different lines of there's imposing their laws on the east. They also said they were going to use the new Eastern territories to send new SS members there to spend the winter there, so that way they could quote never grow soft, so that way they could always be hardened soldiers essentially. And they wanted to use it as a defensive frontier, and that's the eastern side with Poland and the western USSR front.
So they definitely just want to really expand there and basically take over Europe, colonize. So that's what kind of I got out of that question.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that like Justin was saying too, it's like a forever war time thing. You're never gonna not be done with war.
Yeah.
And they're always gonna be prepared for any other attacks that they're gonna have. Are you guys all good with this one? Do you want to add anything?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm okay.
And so as for the films, I thought that they were very interesting. Especially watching, I watched the one about I think it's called The Eternal Jew first, and then I watched the Know Your Enemy. But I thought I would say that they're more similar than different in a way, just because they were attacking, of course, different ideas because it was a different culture. They're two completely different cultures, so they're attacking different viewpoints. But I think that, for example, in the Eternal Jews, they would say they are a large part of the international crime and make up most of the crime in the population and stuff like that. And they would say very similar things about the Japanese citizens, and they would say the Japanese citizens are war and bloodthirsty people. So I think that they were I think the US was trying to make it seem like they were attacking themselves because of war purposes and making them seem dangerous, and Germans were attacking them as a race.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I feel in the beginning of each of the two, I feel the beginnings were different in a sense, in that the Eternal Jew immediately started degrading all the Jewish people and really tried to make it seem like they were horrible. They even compared the Jews to the rat at one point, and we're doing watching that. And more in the Know Your Enemy in the Japan, it almost talks more about it was their history behind why they're like that and how it's so focused on religion versus more on just stating what they think about it. I feel the second video is more trying to explain why people should like not like them, versus I feel like the first video is very much so their own personal take on it. Like, oh, they're like rats. Oh, they make up most of this crime. Versus the second video was like, the origin of it was based on bloodshed. I remember it said that like religion is the leading cause of war. Everything that they do is for their religions. I feel like it's similar since they obviously are both horrible and like saying that you need to like get away and like kill these people. But the second one I feel like did it more in a way of like kind of explaining why the Japanese were the way they were. And the first video was very much, it was just like calling them out and like saying these things that obviously aren't true.
Yeah, I definitely say they were way more similar than I initially thought they were going to be. I have one of the similarities I saw between them was the like an anthropological argument that I know they said it for the Jewish people and for Japanese people, that they use kind of like a non-pure lineage, that they were essentially like a mutt of like racial impurity is kind of how they put it. And I kind of saw that as to discredit or discount them as human beings, just basically like trying to reinforce whoever's watching the propaganda to see these people not as human beings, like you said, like as rats, basically just drawing the comparison to an animal. And there's also the similarity of they both have kind of like a stated destruction or resentment towards sort of towards Christianity. I know like they bring it up in the US one for Japan, they bring it up that like they shut the country out and destroyed like any missionaries that like were sent there. And I think they insinuated the same type of thing for the Jews like coming into Europe. And also obviously they basically just try to paint them as strange and foreign with their religious beliefs and their cultural values, and about how they must be evil or plotting something since they all stick together and live in quote unquote slums. But yeah, I just really thought that it was very interesting how similar both propagandas turned out to be, especially because you said like in the beginning, they did seem very different. Like the US one took like a softer approach, almost kind of sort of celebrating them for being like strong fighters. And they mentioned that like the average Japanese soldier is like 5'3" and 116 pounds, and like their gear is more than half their body weight, but they're really tough. Like that was kind of the complete opposite of the Eternal Jew. Like the Eternal Jew really just was dehumanizing the entire way through, which I think is probably the only real difference between the two. But
yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking about that too. Because very much like at the beginning, it says like they called them phenomenal people, like, and right, they were like almost praising them for how good they were at fighting. But like at the end, it says that they said the country is capable of mass destructions and that it's necessary to take them down. So it's like they were celebrating them, but at the same time, like making sure that people knew that that's obviously not good. Like you need to destroy them, because while they are really good at what they do, that is very dangerous for everyone else. So I feel like that was really the only difference that I saw between the two of them.
Yeah, I felt as though like the Eternal Jew was just like, these people are bad, like like we need to eliminate them, whereas the other one, know your enemy, it's like, hi, like they're tactical, they're dangerous, like they use their good qualities in order to like use it against them almost, and like saying these people are bad because they're good at this, and while the other one was just like, these people are just like racially inferior.
Okay. Anybody else got any thoughts, or are we good?
What's the next one?
All right. Would you classify these films as secular? All right. I definitely would.
Do you want me to read the definition out? It says reread the definition.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, if you have it. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So this free word says like, to be secular, millenarian, a movement must subscribe to a clearly defined ideology, typically in print form, draw a clear line between who is good and who is evil, foresee a utopia once the evildoers are dead or converted, and regard religion as a rival for believers.
I definitely would categorize them both loosely underneath that definition, just because they do use like historical facts, like anthropology and like like racial science as almost basically like tenets of a faith to basically categorize a certain group of people as evil, and then obviously like in contrast whoever's not in that group is good. So it basically draws like a line in the sand of who's like not necessarily who's good per se, but you definitely know who's supposed to be quote unquote evil from whatever the propaganda is, similar to like the apocalypse like readings that we did before.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel like definitely the first one, I feel like definitely kind of goes under secular, because I think it's very clear who they're trying to make out as good, the Aryans, and who I think it's how you say it, and who you think is evil, which are the Jews. And there is like obviously a clearly like defined ideology in that whole video. So I feel like the first one definitely I kind of could see it, because it also says secular means non-religious. So that's awesome. Also, I feel like it's hard because I feel like it's also has religion rooted in it, obviously. But
yeah, both of them kind of did.
like, yeah, so I feel like they both are like loosely secular because they're not fully based on religion, but it does play like a role in it. But there is a very clear line between like who's good and who's evil.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that the Eternal Jew film would maybe fall if there was like a spectrum, I would say more so than the one about the Japanese, because Japanese was like a large part of it was about their religion and like their culture because of their religion, whereas the Eternal Jew was just their culture and themselves as people, like obtaining jobs that are like doctors and lawyers because like they're money thirsty and like they don't want to really help out the Germans and like they just want to use the resources. Like it's more of a culture and like their lifestyles. Whereas I felt as though Know Your Enemy was more based off of like this is their religion and they believe that like their emperor is like an eternal, it's like a god on earth being, and like they are like gods on earth as a soldier, like all this stuff. So it was like their culture was based off their religion, but in the Eternal Jew, I feel like their culture was like they didn't really talk as much about religion, but both have religion, of course, in them.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like they both classify as secular millenarian. Because again, I think the biggest difference is there's a clear, like definitive line of who they think is good and who they think is evil, which is one of the defining characteristics of that. And I think they both have the written ideology, like these videos show it. And like obviously for the Eternal Jew, like there was a written ideology too. And I don't know, I assume there was also written ideology for what happened with the Japanese. So
yeah, for
I
sure.
think that it definitely is. Does anyone else want to say anything about that? Okay.
No.
All right, so we can move on to the cartoons. It says to just like compare the cartoons to the films.
There was a lot of cartoons.
Yeah.
So we can like pick out some of our favorites because they were also kind of like very similar themes.
They're very similar. A lot of them show the Japanese as like monkeys or like chimpanzees a lot of the time.
So I think the first one, it's the one that says Race and Power in the Pacific War. I think that War Without Mercy we've seen in a bunch of the other cartoons as well. And then we saw that in the film, just this ideology that the Japanese would rather die than surrender, because like once they die, they're gods and they're going to be like I don't know, compensated for their service. Like being a soldier is the highest possible thing you can be as a human. Yeah. So then like that's just like their mentality. So I think with those cartoons, when we see it, it's kind of just telling the American people like, hi, like they're not scared to die. Like they are like want to die almost for their country. So like you kind of have to be put in that mindset. That's kind of how I took it.
Yeah, I agree. And then later on, I think it's on page 8. It's the one that says like, how tough are the Japanese? And it says they are not tougher than other soldiers, says a veteran observer, but brutality is a part of their fighting equipment. So I feel like that also shows how like they don't necessarily perceive the Japanese as like better soldiers or better like fighters, but because they're so brutal in what they do, they have to like be worried about it. And they're trying to show that with obviously, I think that's like a gorilla or some other type of like monkey
barbaric
in it.
creature.
Yeah, some barbaric creature to show that they are very brutal, but like almost trying to be like, but don't be scared, like you'll be able to like fight them because they're not tougher than you are. They just their ideology is so they need to be brutal to like kill everyone. And like you were saying, their soldiers are like the highest. Like if you die as a soldier, you die like honorable. Like people would rather die in war than like come back. Oh, I'm pretty sure that said that in the video somewhere. So it also shows that like they're willing to be brutal enough that they can like almost die for their country because they're gonna get the highest honor there is.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when I saw like all of the cartoons. Yeah, I kept getting the idea like the main takeaway for somebody seeing it like during like the 1940s would be like primitive, brutal, animalistic, like yeah, just going back to that dehumanizing idea that you're trying to project out to the public. But obviously from the description of the first cartoon, it's pretty obvious to see how like it was kind of easy for like the US propaganda to achieve that, just because it was like this is kind of like the first major, basically a sneak attack, like an unannounced total destruction, almost like basically essentially like a terrorist attack. So like since this is like the first time that happened, it really catches everybody by like off guard. So it kind of like it does the same thing almost basically like 9/11 did, where it just unites all of the American people. So like the propaganda just basically had like all the work's already done for it. Like it really doesn't have to achieve much because everybody's pretty much on board already.
Yeah,
That's kind of what
one of my favorite cartoons. Well, it sounds bad to say, but the one that I thought was most interesting and like different from the others is on page 9, and it's the one where it's the Leatherneck cartoon, and so it says that
Oh yeah.
it says at the bottom, celebrating Japan's surrender revealed, I don't know, malleability of wartime stereotypes as a certain character. As so like this like was almost immediately transformed into an irritated but already domesticated and even charming pet. So they're saying like right after the wartime, like the Japanese are now like sophisticated and like they're gonna be domesticated, and like they're not gonna, I don't know, like they were like very barbaric, but like we're trying our best to like fix them almost.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel like all of these cartoons have in general is dehumanizing the Japanese and like making them like animals, because I feel like in almost every single one of these cartoons they're a monkey, some type of animal, and I think that just shows that that's what the Americans viewed them as. And I do think that the Leatherneck cartoon really shows that after the war, like they can actually become charming and they can actually like become domesticated and sophisticated, which is already a switch. So I just feel like in general, all of these cartoons just show that they're like dehumanizing the Japanese and trying to get other Americans to do the exact same and just see them as animals and not see them as humans.
Right.
Does anyone else have any other cartoons or anything they want to discuss?
Yeah, it should be good.
I think we're good. Any other questions? No? Okay.
No.